right, you may be seated. Well, welcome to the, is this on? You can hear me? Welcome to the senior oral of William Barry. I am not Perry McDuffie. Mr. McDuffie's father passed away this week, and the funeral's today, and so I'm filling in. So we're excited to hear what William has to say. Joining me on the panel is Matt Waller and Jared Nelson. And so if you would, did I say my name already? Yes, I did. No, I didn't. Steve Westphal. All right, very good. Okay, let's go ahead and pray, and we'll get to it. Father, thank you for this time. I pray that you would be with us. We pray also for Mr. McDuffie, Lord, and just this day, and that you would be with him and his family. I pray for Will, Lord, as he shares with us, and that the things that you want him to say that would come through. And I pray that you would just bless this time and be fruitful. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a rapidly changing world, one in which massive change can occur even overnight. The times we find ourselves in are surely an illustration of just how far mankind has progressed. It is tempting to use this to cut ourselves off from the past. Most of us view things like tradition in a negative light. We think it is antiquated, arbitrary, even oppressive, or suffocating. Author and professor James Patrick, in his book, Essays on Modernity and the Things of Tradition, writes, "We live in an age in which the adjectives new and innovative bless any enterprise, and in which old-fashioned and outdated are curses. To say that something is medieval is to state a conclusion in which facts are irrelevant." Now, this is just false. Tradition and progress are both important and good things. They both work together to serve ourselves and society. But tradition, however, is highly looked down upon by most. And to understand how tradition and progress need to work together, it greatly behooves us to understand what they are and how they work. So what is tradition? Tradition is defined as the handing down of information, beliefs, and customs by word of mouth, or by example from one generation to another without written instruction. St. Paul in his second epistle to the Thessalonians says, "Therefore, brethren, stand fast and hold to the traditions which you have learned, whether by word or by our epistle." Tradition is an important and relevant aspect of our everyday lives. It is all around us, and it is necessary for meaning in life. Now, tradition is, quite frankly, everywhere, whether you like it or not. The modern world is built upon the things of tradition: medicine, the judicial system, science, art, technology, religion, politics, architecture, music, economics, even the canon of biblical scripture are all things of tradition, or products that have arisen out of tradition. Now, we're able to enjoy all the goods of the modern world because we're able to compound and build upon the work begun by our ancestors, by our forefathers. Now, it seems counterintuitive, but it is quite true to say that without tradition, we would be stuck in the Stone Age. Some of these products of tradition, however, are not as desirable or likable than others. For example, when it comes to medicine or mathematics, nobody really objects to tradition within that. But when it comes to politics, socioeconomic reasons, religious things, everybody gets all up in arms, and they have an opinion, and they're vocal about it. But whether people like something or not does not make it any more or less true than it actually is. And the same things that were true centuries ago are still true today, because truth is objective, it is unchanging. Now, in a philosophical sense, tradition gives us meaning and structure. Now, our mind's structure of belief is dogmatic in nature. I'll explain what this means in a minute. But this is contrary to what we would like to think about what goes on within our own heads. We think that we receive sights or sounds, and then that goes through our head, and that's where thoughts come from, and then we compare those things and come to conclusions. But in reality, it is more along the lines of we begin with a set of dogmatic beliefs or a priori assumptions and think thoughts based on the interaction of what we know, based on the interaction of what we perceive with what we already know and believe. We do not see things as they actually are. We see them in terms of what we already know and believe. Because our ideological framework is dogmatic in nature, human thought requires proper formation, which can be found in traditional ideas and beliefs, which, for all intents and purposes, what we call dogma. Now, we don't really believe based on what is factual or observable, though that's not to say that our belief should be unfounded or unsensible. Belief requires an act of faith, which involves the acceptance of something that is beyond us. These dogmas are unchanging, the same today as they were in the Garden of Eden, or the captivity in Egypt, or the time of Christ, or maybe medieval times, or maybe in the last century with the world wars. Without belief, we're unable to act. True meaningful action is the product of faith and belief in things that are true, which we receive through dogmatic tradition. Now, in a psychological sense, tradition also serves us in major ways. Now, every day from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, we're faced with tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny decisions that, though they may seem minor, they can compound and they can drastically affect how our life goes. It eases a major burden on our part to be able to defer to tradition with these small decisions, with the sort of mentality that says, that's the way it's always been, or if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there's nothing wrong with this. True, there's probably substantial room for improvement in how we go about our business, but if we spend all of our time focusing on this fine-tuning, we wouldn't have time for things that truly give us meaning. Now, tradition also gives us a sense of comfort and familiarity with the world around us. With tradition, we're able to stick to what we know. We're able to not have to focus on new things all the time. We don't have to focus on the celebrities or the news or the media. Medieval author Dante Alighieri, in the second part of his Divine Comedy, Purgatorio, laments the rapid change of his native city, Florence, saying, "Whatever threads October sees you spin, when mid-November comes will be unspun. How often have you changed laws and coinage, offices and customs, and revised your citizens? You will see yourself like that sick woman who finds no rest upon her deathbed, but, tossing and turning, tries to ease her pain." Now, this quote explains how a person or a society constantly trying to change and figure out things and progress is like someone dying, searching for comfort. That is exactly what happens to us when we're always paying attention to the changing world, the news, the media, the politicians, the celebrities. We're just worrying about these things, and tradition stabilizes us. It frees up our minds to focus on the bigger picture, so to speak. Now, for these reasons, tradition is a vital piece of not only our past, but our present and future as well. Now, tradition is so much more than just decorating a tree or cooking a turkey. As the 20th century author G.K. Chesterton puts it, tradition means giving a vote to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors. It is the democracy of the dead. Tradition allows us to build on the discoveries and advancements of those who came before us, making us, in the words of medieval scholastic Bernard of Chartres, like dwarves standing on the shoulders of giants. And by holding to tradition, we do a service for future generations because, as the quote attributed to composer Gustav Mahler puts it, tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. Now, that's tradition. On the other hand, we have progress. Now, progress is defined as a movement towards a refined, improved, or otherwise desirable state. Now, I don't need to sell you on progress. It states it right there in the definition that it is desirable. We like progress. We like to do new things. Progress is us working to build the world we want, to achieve what we want and what we think is good. And I'm not here to tell you that's a bad thing. It is a good thing. Within recent history, we've managed to practically eradicate abject poverty, world hunger, human rights abuses. We've made major strides in technology that improve the quality of life for people around the world, like iPhones, electric cars. These technologies that we've managed to discover are truly anomalous, almost miraculous as far as the rest of history is concerned. For example, prior to the 19th century, the average American income was below $1 a day, and that's in today's money. That's adjusted for inflation for today. So that is very poor. So as far as the rest of history is concerned, what we're living in right now is really incredible. And it's also incredible that there's still so much potential for more. Now, some will object and they'll assert that tradition and progress are diametrically opposed and that one is better than the other. In most people's minds, this usually means favoring progress over tradition. However, the contrary argument isn't uncommon. The former progressive argument commonly appears as tradition is this antiquated, arbitrary thing. It's oppressive. It needs to be done away with in favor of modern progressive values like diversity, equality of outcome, these kinds of things. Now, on the other hand, you have the traditionalist argument. It states that tradition is to be blindingly, unquestionably followed. This argument is usually made by people who are holding positions of political or religious authority, and they'll state that we need to do everything exactly how we always have, how we did 100, 500 years ago, and that progress will lead to the downfall of society. Now, both of these arguments follow along the same line of thinking, which is that either tradition or progress are better than the other, and that they must be put in opposition. The truth is, however, that tradition and progress are not to be opposed. They must be properly integrated in order for a society to flourish. Once a society is cut off from tradition, a major vacuum appears in the space that was occupied by tradition. Chaos will rush in to fill this vacuum, and the culture will fall prey to all sorts of terrible things. Without tradition, a culture ends up like an amnesiac, not knowing who they are or where they came from. This chaos is personified in the person of Mephistopheles, the fictional devil from Johannes Goethe's work, Faust. Now in this work, Mephistopheles, the devil, introduces himself to the title character, saying, "I am the spirit that negates, and rightly so, for all that comes to be deserves to perish wretchedly." Now in Faust, the devil, under the name of Mephistopheles, like I said, visits the title character, Dr. Faustus, who has grown disenfranchised with his pursuit of science and academia. And he makes a deal with the devil. He wagers his soul in exchange for worldly delights and experiences. And this is exactly what happens to us when we abandon tradition. This chaos that ensues leaves individuals prey to things like nihilistic worldviews or radical ideologies, both things which led to great horrors in the past century with the world wars. Now, you may not like the traditional structures that are in place, but when you take those away, what comes back, what kind of fills its place, is often so much worse, like war and things of that nature. Because dogmatic belief is requisite for meaningful action, and because true progress is not possible if it is not rooted in tradition, an entire generation without tradition will perish and nothing good will come out of it. Now, on the other hand, tradition without progress becomes stale and self-fulfilling. When a society closes itself off to progress, it does not preserve tradition, but instead becomes like the unprofitable servant described by Jesus Christ in Matthew 25 with the parable of the talents. We've all heard this one. A master leaves to go away, and he entrusts 3 of his servants with a certain amount of money, talents, an ancient unit of currency. Now, upon his arrival, he evaluates the work done by those people, by his servants. The ones who took what they were given and multiplied it, returning more than they were given, are rewarded for their faithfulness. But the last servant, who simply buries his sum and does nothing with it, is punished for his unfaithfulness. This is what happens to us when we're poor stewards of the traditions that we receive. We're meant to hold firmly to these things, and through that, gain further understanding into just what exactly these things are and how they work. Because the truth is, we don't exactly know. We would like to think we do, but we don't exactly know what is contained by all of these traditions. That is not to say, however, that all progress must be revolutionary, or that if we're not making these radical strides, then we're being poor stewards. No. Much of the work through tradition is done by coming to a further understanding and experiential knowledge of just what these traditions are, by living them out, by progressing in wisdom, understanding, and virtue. Through following tradition, we come to a greater understanding of what these traditions are and what role they are to play in our own lives and the lives of future generations. In this way, progress revivifies tradition and keeps it from growing stagnant. Now, tradition and progress, then, are not to be pitted against each other or really even perceived as separate entities. They work together, and neither one bears fruit without the other. On this topic, I interviewed Father Rodney White, pastor of St. Stephen's Church in Midland, Texas, and he helped me a lot with my thesis. One really good quote he gave me, he said, "Tradition informs progress, and progress tempers tradition." Now, what I think we should all take away from this is to remain faithful to traditional values and ideas and not chase after every bright, shiny new thing and essentially throw the baby out with the bathwater. Through the work of those who raised us, we have knowledge of right and wrong, of what we should and shouldn't do, but we still often do things we know we had better not, both us individually and society as a whole. This is the spiritual warfare, the dichotomy of tradition, which takes place not only in the outside world, but within ourselves as well. And just like in the outside world, bad things happen when we try to separate them and oppose them and use them to our own ends. No, tradition and progress must be integrated to benefit society and ourselves, and only then can we enjoy the fruits of each. Thank you.
All right. How do you feel?
I feel good.
Feel good. Very good. Excellent. Okay, so let's go through some basic questions first. What are your plans for next year?
University of Dallas in Irving, Texas. Yes.
All right. I like how it's the University of Dallas in Irving. That's interesting.
Right. I say that to distinguish from UTD, because that's what people think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay. And what will you be studying there?
Business.
Okay. You're going to have to start elaborating more. Yeah, just...
I'm not quite dead set on a degree yet, so I'm planning on studying business.
Okay.
Yes.
And then seeing where that takes you. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So obviously, since I wasn't your senior project this year,
Right.
what was your senior project like?
It was good. I taught Greece and Rome with Mr. McDuffie, and there were a lot of good kids in that class. I enjoyed it.
Okay, very good. So, because of the track that you're on with MCA, you didn't have to do a senior project, but you chose to do that. Why did you choose to do a senior project?
I wanted the experience of the senior assistant, that whole thing, and then also senior oral. It wouldn't have felt right, really, to just skip over that just because I can.
Okay. So what do you think that you learned from going ahead and kind of going the hard road and deciding to do the senior thesis?
I guess that you shouldn't just get out of stuff just because you can, and that doing what's harder can be beneficial.
Okay. So what do you think is one thing that you got out of like actually doing the thesis part? Or what do you think is like you can take away from that of, man, I'm really glad I did this?
I think definitely the one thing is the aspect of actually preparing for something important and hard, and also getting better at writing papers, giving speeches, and all that.
Okay, very good, very good. So let's talk a little bit about traditions. What do you think about the tradition of high school retreat that we have here at MCA? What are your thoughts on that tradition?
Do I like it? I like it. I think it's a cool thing, unique to MCA, and it serves a lot of good purposes.
Okay, so if you heard that next year we were just going to axe it, be done with it, would you come and say something about that?
Yes, I would.
Okay, well, good. So what reasons would you give to say, no, you need to keep having this tradition?
It just, it would, for the people that aren't graduating yet, so for me, it wouldn't really affect me. But for the next grade, the juniors, they've been doing that for 3 years, and they would just have to give it up. It would just not be a fun thing to do on their part. And then there's also the 7th and 8th graders who have been hearing all about this for the whole time they've been at MCA, and then it just, I feel like it would be kind of crushing to realize that, no, you don't get that anymore.
Okay. So I want to talk about one of the traditions that happens on high school retreat. Can you tell me about Grandpa?
Grandpa. Oh, 2 years ago, it was 2 years ago.
Was it? I can't remember how many years you've been doing it.
Year.
Okay.
It was kind of, I had this straw hat that I was wearing, and I was kind of doing this grandpa voice and just saying crazy things.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember it, and you had quite a crowd.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I would have people gathered up as I was saying these crazy, rather comedic things.
Yeah, and so you did that, and it's interesting how you did that. And then so, this past year when you were a senior, then everybody, I hear people the buzz. They're like, oh, Grandpa. They were looking forward to that. Why do you think it became a tradition?
I think people thought it was funny, and when there's something like that, it's like when it's going on in the moment, it comes to an end, and if it's like actually good, people kind of want more of it.
Okay.
So I think people just find enjoyment in it.
Yeah, it was good. And so are you hoping somebody takes on the grandpa mantle this year?
I mean, maybe. It's maybe not that specifically, just
right.
But
if you had to choose somebody, who do you think would be the good next grandpa?
I feel like Nick Telshow, as far as juniors go, or Caleb Patterson.
That Caleb was who came to my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Then as far as younger classmen, I feel like I could see someone like maybe Evan Lopez.
Yeah. For sure, that was another one. Yeah. We're tracking. We're tracking right here.
Okay.
Very good. Okay. And so let's talk a little bit. I got one more question, then I'll pass it off to these guys. When there's traditions that are in conflict, that don't agree with each other, then how do we decide which of those traditions to value?
So could you give an example?
Right.
Maybe?
Okay. Yeah. Let's say Christianity has a long tradition.
Right.
Islam has a long tradition. Those are two traditions in conflict. And so how do we decide which of those traditions to, I guess, accept or follow?
Right. That is an interesting question because it's like the people who are on both sides of this, they believe it with like an equal fervor.
Yeah.
With an equal fervor. So I guess you have to look at you have to examine what the traditions are.
Okay.
Because when you're looking at, say, Christianity and Islam as a whole, you can't look at something specific like maybe a holiday. You You have to take it all in itself. And I guess you have to check the coherence of the actual system, because they are traditions, but they're also systems in many ways.
Okay.
So I guess whatever makes more sense with the world and what makes more coherence within itself, and also looking at the fruits of each one,
Okay.
I think would be a good way.
Okay, very good. Oh, thanks, Will.
Will, that was a great paper to read. Really intriguing topic.
Thank you.
It's I've enjoyed having you in class and in powerlifting, and it just was. I feel like we've had a few conversations along these lines. So, what a fun time for us to connect on it. You quoted from your book. You said you pull out the quote, and then this was the first paragraph. I don't quite remember where it fell in there, but you mentioned that in this quote you pulled out. It says, "Innovative and new bless any enterprise in which old-fashioned and outdated are a curse." And you're kind of saying that newness typically is seen as a blessing, where old-fashioned, outdated is always seen as a curse. Tell me, I mean, I feel like outdated, like my phone is outdated and it doesn't work right?
Right.
I feel like outdated is always a curse. Like, what does he mean when he says that?
Right. I had a thought similar to that. I think that what he's saying is he's using, so you could swap in for outdated, you could swap in like antiquated,
Okay.
not maybe specifically that, but something like that sounds better.
Yeah.
I think he was using that to make his point that we think that newer things are better.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily outdated in a obsolete sense, but outdated in just simply newer things have come.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So, and then you also have, I'm pulling out a little bit more of what you said. You said, no one really objects to a tradition in medicine or mathematics, but when it comes to socioeconomic topics, everybody's up in arms. What are some of those socioeconomic topics you're thinking of?
Without getting into too much detail, like
Sure.
a lot of the stuff we're dealing with today, so with economics, it would be more of a capitalistic free market system, would be the more traditional thing for today, whereas there's a lot of people trying to push for more socialized type thing.
Sure.
Then there's also the social part of that, which is things like abortion or gay marriage or those types of issues.
Gotcha. And you feel like that tradition versus progress is where they're combating.
Yes, I think they do combat in many ways with that aspect.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So, and one thing you mentioned, I guess you seem to make a distinction whenever we have tradition. In your talk, you mentioned tradition as custom, and you mentioned tradition also as, like, it seems to be hinted at as habit too.
Right.
Right. What's the difference between those two, tradition and custom, habit and custom?
So, habit, I feel like, would be more of something you do that maybe you don't do intentionally. So, whereas custom would be something that, so habit is more of you feel like a drive to do it. That's like more than just you think it's good, so you do it. Yeah. Like if you're addicted to something, it can become a habit. Yeah. Whereas custom is more of something that it may not have explicit reasons for doing it, like shaking hands, but we still do it because in many ways there's not really anything better we can do, I guess. Like we wouldn't really just change something like shaking hands. That would take a whole lot of work to upheave that.
Yeah, that's true.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Is there room for routine? Is routine part of that as well?
I think so.
Yeah.
Routine kind of links habit and custom, I guess.
What do you think it is about tradition that's particularly comforting?
It's like the stuff we're comfortable with, like Christmas and Thanksgiving. Those are traditions. Yeah. Tradition gives us things like that it can provide us ways to spend our time meaningfully.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Mephistopheles quote, where Mephistopheles is speaking. He says, he's the spirit that negates And then later on it says there's nothing there, nothing better would begin. And I think you relate that to whenever there's a void, the enemy can come in and step into that void. Is it the case the enemy is replacing a tradition or replacing a void with tradition?
I think that is the way it can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the enemy can seep in through ways other than that. But when you do something like remove tradition entirely, that definitely provides a big void, a big vacuum, which anything can just come in there.
Yeah. How could the enemy use tradition to get in?
Right. He could. So there could be something a whole society starts doing, like maybe some kind of substance people start using that just becomes tradition as generations keep using it because they like to do it, and something that's not good for you, like maybe a drug or something, and that can in some ways become a sort of negative tradition, I would say.
Yeah. And so, like, how is tradition used to keep the enemy at bay, like to keep him from coming in?
Most of the traditions that we do have are like, we have them for a reason, because it's not just that somebody hundreds, thousands of years ago just thought about it and everybody just kind of shrugged and went, sure, whatever. It's like, for it to remain to this day, you have to get, hundreds, tens of hundreds of generations to keep doing this thing. And so for that many people to keep doing something that is wrong or evil is, in my mind, unlikely. So most of these traditions are based in good things, and they bring good things.
Yeah.
If that answers your question.
Yeah. No, I mean, it adds to it. It kind of creates the complexities of it too. I think you can have where traditions become what's worshipped and not. It's kind of worshiping the creator versus worshiping the creation.
Right. It's kind of the conflict between no one man can serve two masters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Have you, in your research, did you pick up on any cultures that are void of tradition?
Yes. Someone I was talking to, they gave me an example of Sweden, and how Sweden in the past decades, century, whatever, I'm not exactly sure, but they've eliminated a lot of the more classically liberal ideas, so things like life, liberty, and it's more like modern, progressive values. And Sweden has extraordinarily high, I believe, violence rates, and like theft and all that kinds of things. So I would use Sweden as an example for that stuff, that they thought they were doing good but didn't.
Yeah. So is it just that they have a lot of violence and a lot of crime? Is that kind of the result of it right there?
So can you explain that more?
Like, I mean, you said kind of a result of no traditions or lack of traditions. Is it that they're more violent and there's more crime rampant?
So it can have those physical manifestations, so people kind of act out that void, I guess. It can also just be that without those traditions, the people are just kind of empty, and they do begin to turn to other things. So the person I was talking to said that these Swedish people, when you like challenge them on these progressive ideas and things, equality, diversity, things like that, if you challenge that, then they don't really know how to react, and they act like you have two heads. They just kind of cut you off.
And I guess, okay, I'm going to pass the mic.
All right. Good job, Will.
Thank you.
So, in a couple of your previous conversations with Mr. Westfall and Mr. Waller, it seems like we kind of alluded to the idea that there's such a thing as bad traditions. Would you say that that's accurate?
I would say so.
Okay. So, if there's bad traditions out there, through what lens should we test our traditions?
Right. I would say that lens of what we know is true. So things Christianity we know is true. We can look at what compares and contrasts with Christianity, and things that are explicitly contrary to that, we can, for the most part, know that that's not a good thing.
Okay. So it also seems like traditions tend to change as time goes on.
Right.
So do you think that traditions, they might be formed one way, but do you think that they can be innovated and improved upon?
Right. I think that is part of the idea of tradition and progress, not exactly being these separate ideas, and that really they work together. And so progress helps along tradition, and tradition holds back progress so that we don't rush headlong into things we shouldn't. That's what I would say.
Okay. Can you think of some traditions in our society that maybe we've lost?
That we've lost? Within America, there's very much so what we have our traditions are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, a very, deistic, almost agnostic, like perception of God. Like it's not a Christian perception of God per se, for the most part. And so we kind of don't really have that Christian culture, even though it may not be this, hedon, it may not be this terrible thing. It's still not explicitly this Christianized culture.
Okay. I agree with that. How do we get that back? How do we recover that?
Right. I think that starts with us, actually living out, Christianity, doing what is taught by Christianity, and, passing that on to, our kids, our grandkids, and then and also serving as evangelizing, serving as a witness to others so that they can look at us and say, what Christianity is all about. And then maybe they will convert as well. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how you pass that along and grow it.
Okay, awesome. What are some traditions that are important to you?
So I am Catholic. This is a mostly Protestant school. So we're all Christians, but Catholics, our traditions are, the Mass, the sacraments, our canon of Scripture, things that are more nuanced. I would say those are what are most important to me.
Okay. Where did some of those traditions begin?
Theologically, I would have to say that they, began with Christ and his teaching to the apostles.
Okay. On page 2 of your oral, you say that tradition is an important thing that is all around us and vital for living a good life. Okay. So in what way is tradition vital for living this good life?
Kind of in the same sense that if we cut ourselves off from tradition, we leave this void and we can't really do meaningful action. And how, the dogmatic structure of belief, how we need belief to act, and that we can't really figure it all out ourselves. We can't figure out everything we believe. That's why we have a canon of Scripture, so we can come to know these things. So can you repeat your question?
So, yeah. How is tradition vital for living the good life?
Right. So through tradition, we come to these beliefs, and that allows us to do meaningful action. Mm-hmm. And I would say a good life is about meaning.
Okay. Awesome. You also say in your oral, in another part, you're talking about small decisions. And you say, it eases a great burden for us to be able to defer to tradition with these small decisions, with a sort of mentality that says, that's the way it's always been done, and there is nothing wrong with this. So just because we've always done something a certain way, does that mean that's the best way?
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way. Like, for example, these small decisions could be what time we wake up, or the routine we take to work, or what we eat before we go to work. And there's probably always things we could do better, like instead of a piece of toast, we could have a fruit. But so yeah, can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're okay. I was just asking, within this idea that, well, that's just the way I've always done it.
Right.
You know, can that cause us to stagnate and stop personal growth? Because, you know, we're no longer improving. We're just contenting ourselves with doing it the same way.
Right. I think if we view these things as like things we have to do rather than things we can do, so you become obsessed with like the way you do things, that can lead to stagnation. But also when you become obsessed with doing everything perfect, that can also, you'll burn out. You won't have time for what is meaningful, like I said. And so...
Awesome. Yeah, no,
Okay.
you answered my question.
Thanks.
So, great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass it.
All right. A couple more things. You talk about progress in here, and so how would you, from your point of view, how would you define progress?
I would say it is us, building on tradition with things that aren't contrary to tradition. That doesn't mean we have to simply oppose everything that is tradition to make progress. It's us using these things that have really already been done, and we can build on that. Like, for example, we don't have to figure out everything Aristotle figured out for ourselves in order to advance farther than that. We can use what he took, what he did, and we can take that and be, like dwarves on the shoulders of giants.
Okay. So considering that, do you believe that modern man is more intelligent than ancient man, or is it the that we have all this progress? I mean, how does that work?
Right. So you say more intelligent. I think depending on the way you look at it, you could make that case.
Okay.
But it's more like we have more knowledge. I wouldn't. If you say more intelligent, it makes it sound like we have a higher IQ or
Right.
something like that. And I don't know any statistics on that, but I don't think that's the case, that we are, have more capacity for knowledge than we did. We just know more.
Okay, more like the accumulation of knowledge and
Right.
technology. Okay.
I think so.
You talked in here also about how progress has improved the quality of life.
Yes.
Have there been any ways that progress has, diminished the quality of life?
I'm sure. So when you talk about progress in terms of like material things, like
Okay.
iPhones and, Ethan Childers gave his oral on how social media and all this technology is really kind of bringing us down. So I would use that as an example.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's improved our physical quality of life. But I think when it comes to like our spiritual life, when we get all tied up in this change and progress, it kind of diminishes it.
Okay. So where would you put things, let's say, like nuclear, biological, chemical weapons? Those are obviously, technology progress. How would you classify that in this idea of either improving quality of life, diminishing quality of life?
So is that sort of like asking, are these things good or bad?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say they're neutral.
Okay.
It's kind of like a gun. It does depend on how we use it.
Okay.
Now, you can't really use a nuclear bomb for recreational purposes. But,
or you shouldn't, at least.
yeah, you shouldn't. But the technology of the nuclear bomb, you can, from what I understand, we've been able to use that to like generate power.
Okay.
And it's a pretty clean source. So I think the discovery of that has led to good things. I wouldn't say that the things themselves are good.
Okay.
But
All right. So you seem very, wanting to be positive with this about, the goods of tradition, the goods of progress. So what is it about man that takes tradition and progress and points it in a negative direction?
right, that's definitely the sinful nature after the fall from the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
It's that we are born into sin and we want to do what we want, and we don't really care about what's right. And that's true for most of human history. So we idolize things like tradition and progress. So and we view them as like only means to our own ends.
Okay. So then how would you remedy that? Like, say if you were sitting down with someone and you're wanting to share with them this truth of how they can use tradition and progress to a meaningful end, how would you instruct them to do that?
It's not really that you look at it, more like you're specifically using tradition and progress to an end.
Okay.
I would say it's more along the lines of you're growing in virtue and wisdom, and that through this, when the opportunities arise, you'll be ready and you'll be able to use it for good.
Okay. So you've mentioned virtue a couple of times, and so in your mind, what are some of those most important virtues if we're to use tradition and progress rightly?
Right. What comes to my mind is, so you have the 7 deadly sins, and then opposing that, I don't know if I can name them off
That's
the
okay.
top of my head.
Just
but
whichever ones you got.
Yeah, zeal, chastity, generosity, humility. That's
okay.
That's where I'll leave it.
Okay. That's okay. Very good. Okay. So I'll shift gears a little bit for a moment. How long have you been coming to MCA?
Since kindergarten.
Okay, since kindergarten. All right, all the way through. So at the upper school, what has been your favorite class at the upper school?
I really liked World History 2. I think that was with Mr. Waller. That was 1. World History 1 and 2 I thought were really cool classes.
Nice.
Both of them were cool.
Yeah.
Geometry with Mr. Priya, I liked that class because it was more of a logical approach to like math and stuff as opposed to plug and chug.
Okay.
Equations.
Right.
And I've also liked my senior assistant classes this year: government and economics, advanced physics.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so you've liked quite a few. All right, that's
Yes.
good. That's good. So I won't ask you how many books of the curriculum that you've read. Okay. It's probably not 100% for any MCA student. But has there been a book that you've read along the way that you really enjoyed?
Right. I really enjoyed the Divine Comedy, Dante, like I mentioned in the paper, Dante Alighieri. So I liked that. I liked Faust. As far as I enjoyed the story of it, I thought it was neat. Those are the two Brothers Karamazov. I really liked that one as well. I would say those are my 3.
Okay, it's a final question, and I'll move it on. So going back to Brothers K, was there a certain theme or anything that you really got out of Brothers K that really gripped you?
Right. They're actually, so within Brothers K, you have the theme of like good and evil, and like, let me see if I can remember this. Ivan Karamazov, and he's kind of the atheistic, kind of cold, scientific guy, and then Alyosha, the religious guy.
Right.
And so there's that whole conflict of like the world versus religion, and like organized religion, and talking about that. And I thought that stuff was cool.
Okay.
Like one of the parts of that book that stuck out to me was the Grand Inquisitor portion.
Yes.
Which was actually a separate story released too, right?
Right.
Okay. I thought that was neat.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Will.
So, yes, I have always enjoyed every class I've had with you. Will, questions are so good, and I feel like you on the spectrum of reading books, I feel like you probably read most, if not 100%. It was really close. I feel like you were.
I'll reserve the right to remain
No, it's not a
silent.
question. That's just my observation. And I say that too. I mean, you talk about the intelligence level, man. I don't want to match wits with you. That's for sure. But I do have a test. All right. So this is from one of my favorites, which is the Odyssey, which would be 8th grade for you. So I want you to guess who this is. And these guys, and it applies. It works into it. So these are the guys who trust so to the everlasting gods. They never plant by their own hands, with their own hands, or plow the soil. Unsown, unplowed, the earth teems with all they need. Wheat, barley, vines, swelled by the rains of Zeus. to yield a big, full-bodied wine and clustered grapes. They have no meeting place or council, no laws either. No, upon the mountain peaks they live in arching caverns, each a law to himself, ruling wives and children, not a care of the world for any neighbor. Which of the characters is this that I'm reading of?
From the Odyssey,
From
the
the
characters
Odyssey,
you're talking about?
Yeah, which one?
Man, maybe Odysseus.
Well, no, Odysseus confronts these people.
Okay.
So who are these people that
Are they
he's
like
confronting?
the sirens?
Not sirens. It's
Okay.
it's the Cyclopses.
Oh, okay.
Right? So
Right.
the Cyclopses, and they're known for not having traditions.
Okay.
They don't have customs or anything like that. And so, and Homer, when he writes about them just being brutes, right? Do you think it's the case that if we avoid tradition completely and customs, I mean, it said they didn't have shipwrights, so they couldn't go anywhere either. Are we going to turn out like brutes?
Without traditions?
Yeah.
I would say without tradition, you can't really have progress, which is what it sounds like with these Cyclops fellows.
Yeah.
So,
Cyclops is our translation. So, okay.
So you're saying, without the tradition, will we end up like these Cyclopses? I would say in many ways, yes, because without that tradition, there's not really progress.
Yeah. Okay. And so, thinking through that, are you saying that it's just that without tradition they won't progress at all?
You can try, and it's like individuals may progress. So like one guy may figure out the wheel, but if they're not doing any tradition, then you just have a bunch of different guys coming after each other, but they keep inventing the wheel. I guess would be an example of that.
Oh, that's a good
And
point.
so all you have is a wheel.
Yeah. So do you think tradition can fix those guys?
I mean, I don't know them personally, but if they were able to kind of compound more on the achievements of those who came before them and use that better, then they could probably figure some stuff out.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so switching gears just a little bit, you personally, right? What are some traditions that are, and you mentioned a number of traditions within the church, within your church, that are easy to follow. What are some ones, just general traditions, that are harder for you to follow?
Things like growing in virtue, things like being selfless and loving your neighbor. These things that we all struggle with. That's part of the Christian life. That are just a struggle. Yeah.
Okay. And then what traditions? I'm going to go ask you to be specific. What are some ones that are easier for you to follow?
So it's definitely some of the stuff like Lent comes up as an example.
Okay.
So people who follow, do Lent, they can do the bare minimum and just, not eating meat on Fridays.
Yeah.
And that becomes like just scraping by, a way to do the bare minimum. And so you're kind of missing out on the point of it. It depends on your mindset.
Yeah.
But so those are the more easy things to follow, more of those outward signs.
Yeah. Now, and what about, so we had the great joy of, I had a lot of fun doing powerlifting with you. What benefit did you find from the tradition of powerlifting, or what traditions did you find within powerlifting, and what benefits did you see?
Definitely the morning workouts, waking up at 5 a.m., which, it sucks at the time, but it's a good thing because you can get your workout out of the way before anybody else is awake, for the most part. So it's like, that's a good thing. The meets that you go to, they really help you test yourself and push yourself with other people.
Yeah. I think too, you found a place in lifting weights too. What was the benefits of the tradition of you just getting in and lifting weights?
Definitely, health. You're pushing yourself. It kind of makes you more humble because you realize that you can't lift these massive weights from the get-go, and hard work and all that.
Yeah. And I mean, was it just lifting weights, or did you have other traditions you followed?
I mean, I started lifting weights. I never really got into reading. I never really, going to church, being more involved with church and stuff is part of it.
Okay. All right, I'm going to pass the mic.
All right, well, if you know anything about baseball, which I don't, we're on the home stretch. I think.
I think that's horses. Right?
Is that? Yeah, see? Case in point.
Yeah.
All right, so I too have a question regarding the Iliad and the Odyssey. I know. Yeah, I'll take your copy. Ironic. So thinking back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, can you think of a tradition that was utilized in conveying those stories way back in the day?
Oh, so rather than writing it down, they would actually say it, and pass it on, so through oral speech.
Yeah, they would memorize the whole story,
right.
And then they'd go and, they'd tell the story, right? So they knew it all and told the story orally without anything written down. So obviously, I need this now. Progress happened, right?
Right.
We got the book.
Right.
Okay, and so the story began to be written down. So what do you think was lost in that?
So I think when you're doing the whole memorization thing, it definitely makes it more important to you. You're thinking about it more, and with that memorization, it's kind of always in your head because you always need to be able to know what all that stuff is. So the nuances of what is meant by certain things and how you can apply certain things to your life, you get all that when you memorize it. When you have the book, you can kind of just put it on a shelf and maybe tuck into it every other year, but it's more important to you.
You really don't know it as thoroughly
That's true.
As you would if you
yes
took the time to memorize it. Okay. So I'm going to appeal to your paper one more time. So in your paper, you say things like human rights, personal liberties, and a higher standard of living are regarded as almost universally good things by most.
Right.
None of these things, however, are even possible if not for tradition. So I feel like as we look back through time and through history, it seems like most of the governments that have been around have been forms of tyranny or forms of oppression.
Right.
So how do human rights and liberties come out of those traditions?
So how do human rights and liberties come out of these things? So you have these things, and so no, people don't like them that much because they may abuse their power, they may be tyrannical, so people aren't really a fan of that. So you have the things like the Magna Carta, you have checks and balances on the government, you have the American Revolution, the people kind of rising up, and kind of how in ancient Rome, that's what we're going over in Greece and Rome, you have the tribune with the plebeians and how they, after Civil War, they get that tribune and they get representation in the government. I hope I got all that right, but so that kind of tyranny, that abuse of power, makes the people kind of realize that something's wrong and they make things better.
Okay, so maybe a negative tradition can bring people together to start a new, better tradition.
Right.
Okay, awesome.
Or they can take the good out of what that was and take the bad out.
Okay, so you can take the good out of a bad tradition,
right,
and utilize that in making a better tradition moving forward.
I think so. I think that's a lot of what happened with the American Revolution.
Awesome. So, what are some traditions at the school that you think should remain important to us?
Right. Retreat's cool. We have our tea night. We have our tea lunch on Thursdays. This whole senior oral thing. senior class assistant. A lot of the books we read. The Christian identity.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there some traditions that, since you've been at the school, that the school's moved away from that you wish we would get back to?
Let me think about that. So there's been I've heard about the juniors this year have kind of been the guinea pigs for a lot of changes in like the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
So like physics and trig is now pre-cal, I think.
Yeah.
And this year etiquette was different than it was for us. And so I think those are some things that have changed.
Okay, awesome. Well, I've never had the opportunity of having you in a class here at MCA.
I know.
But I know. I actually have. I've been able to have quite a few conversations with you and Mr. Adams, though, and while we don't always agree, I appreciate the fact that you're always willing to listen and take into account other people's thoughts and ideas. And I think, that's a very good skill to have, just being able to listen to other people speak and think about what they're saying. And I think that you're going to do great after graduating from MCA.
Thanks.
So now I'm going to turn it over to you, and it's your turn to ask us a question.
All right. So I'll start with you. Yeah. Think of a pretty crazy story you have from your career at MCA.
All right. Well, I'll think about that.
Okay.
While I pass it on.
Okay. So, Mr. Waller, you have any crazy stories from from your football days?
From my football days?
Yeah. When you played for Baylor, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Do you want me to tell one?
Sure.
Okay.
He was just asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a yes or no.
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of appropriate ones too.
I can let you think about that. We can move it on.
All right.
So, Mr. Westfall, you had Kyle Driver and Alec Micheletti in the same RT group
Oh, yes.
last year. How was that?
Yeah.
It was unforgettable.
It was interesting. I thought, it could have been a dumpster fire.
But was it?
It wasn't.
Okay.
Nah, it worked out pretty well. Obviously I've known Alec for a long time.
Right.
And it's interesting. and so he did well. I think that the students really loved him. I think Alec really cares about people.
Okay.
And so I think that went well. I think he didn't always make the best decisions, and so there were some things to clean up afterwards.
Okay.
But it was a lot of fun having Kyle in there because I had Kyle, I believe, his 7th grade year.
Okay.
And he hated me back when he was a 7th grader. He denies it now. But by the time we came around junior year and having him in there, it was really good to be able to work with him, and I thought he did a great job. And so, but it's been neat really seeing all these seniors, seeing you guys for quite a while, and how far you've come and how you've grown and doing this thing. So I'm proud of you guys.
Thanks.
Okay, so when I want to say I was a junior in high school. I hung out with some guys by the name of Dalton Vanderberg, Benjamin Snell, and Weston Womack. And Midland doesn't get a lot of snow, so one winter, we get a pretty good snowstorm, right? And everything's covered in snow. And so we have this brilliant idea that we're all going to go hop in Weston's truck and we're going to go do donuts. All right? And so we're looking around for places to go do donuts. And there's a junior high football field somewhere at MCA. I'm not gonna say where. And in Midland. I'm sorry, not at MCA, in Midland. And so we drive up onto the field and we do lots of donuts, and it was pretty exciting. Not really thinking about the effect it's having.
Ooh.
Well, we leave, and it was a lot of fun. And 2 days later, all the snow was gone per usual. And so we're driving by this football field the next day, and there are tons of ruts just in circles all over the field.
Ooh.
And there were cops actually out there, like, looking at the ruts, and we just kept going. So yeah, it wasn't one of my better moments.
Man.
Wallace got to answer.
Right.
So, okay. Football stories. There's a lot of really funny ones
Right.
that have happened. I would go into two-a-days at Baylor, and when I walk in, I'm to be playing college football, I am too short, too small, too slow, too weak, too white, too all those things. Right? So I walk in, and it's really I kind of stick out, because I'm so much lower than everybody. And as I walk in, you can tell whenever the new guys walk in. Once you go to 2 days for the first day, you have to act like you deserve to be there, and you have to walk with a chip on your shoulder, and that's just the attitude you have to have. And so my first 2 days, I have that attitude-ish, because I'd been around enough. But then when I'm comfortable, it's a different story. But so every other guy that comes in is like that. And we had a guy that came in, and he I don't know why, he thought it was a good idea and he was African American. He thought it was a good idea to bleach his hair before he came in. And so he came walking into the room, and everybody just kind of got quiet and just started laughing. And so this poor kid, new to it all, he gets razzed. Another guy comes in, and they're just tough, but he kind of sits down, and I'm real comfortable. I say to him, hey, what position you playing? That's usually the first question you ask him. He's real tough, and he's like, I'm a defensive lineman. I said, okay, that's cool. He says, what position you play? I said, I'm a cold-blooded deep snapper. So for those that don't know, a deep snapper, the guy that punts the ball? I was the dude that throws it between his legs back there. That's all I did. And they're like, oh, you play center. No, I don't play center. I'm just that. So they usually got to laugh and kind of got them to calm down. So that was my role on the team. So just to pacify those. So I'm gonna have Mr. Nelson just pray for you as we close, and so.
All right, pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for Will Barry. I thank you for his character and for everything that he's brought to the school. And I thank you for the topic that he chose and the passion that he has for this topic. And I just pray for him as he will be leaving MCA soon. And I just pray that you'll bless everything that he puts his hand to and help him to do your will to the best of his ability. In Christ's name I pray and ask it. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.